Cool. So we're going to get started with Workable. As you know, we are here today to discuss how to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations. There's certainly been a lot of movement in this area due to today's current social and political climate, specifically the Black Lives Matter movement. But it's important to remember that diversity and inclusion is a long-term game. So over the next hour, our expert panel is going to focus on tangible actions we can take to foster a more inclusive, safe environment where everyone can bring their full selves to work. And most importantly, how can we make it sustainable? We here at Workable are learning ourselves, so I'm incredibly excited to talk with our impressive panelists about this subject. So let's begin with a few introductions. Chikere, will you go ahead and start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about your organisation?
Yeah, definitely. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Chikere Ibokwe. I'm based in London and I am an executive recruiter, and I am also a diversity activist. I live, sleep diversity. It's something I'm super passionate about. I currently recruit mid to senior level HR professionals into all sectors. I work for an organisation called Macmillan Davies. I also run a community called Allyship. That's www.allyship.co.uk. And the idea is to bring together our community of allies into a safe community and ensure that they can talk about issues that are affecting them today. I think in terms of 2020 has been one of those years that has been quite, a worrying year for us all in terms of COVID, in terms of Black Lives Matter. And as I said before, and many times that, would we be talking about race if it wasn't for COVID? I think, 2019 and the years before, when we supposed to speak about diversity and inclusion, it has always been gender, sexual orientation, rightly so. And I guess what 2020 has done, it really has brought race into the forefront. So I'm really, really excited to be speaking to you all today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chikere. Over to you, Siobhan.
Hi, my name's Siobhan. I'm the Inclusion and Diversity Lead at White Hat. White Hat is a tech startup with a social mission to develop an outstanding alternative to university and ensure that there are a range of routes into kind of top workplaces, and we do that through apprenticeships. We have a really specific focus on diversity as well, and ensuring our apprenticeships are accessible to all and that we are developing the diverse workforce of the future. My remit both covers ensuring that we are kind of creating an inclusive community for our apprentices, both in terms of our education and apprentice outcomes, and also that we are internally really reflecting on our workforce as a startup and who has access to our startup. So both kind of an internal and an external diversity and inclusion lens.
Perfect. Thanks, Siobhan. And last but not least, over to you, Zishan.
Morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I'm Zishan Shamsi. I'm a partner at the People Collective. A bit about my background. I've been working in the people space for about 13 years now. Started off in agency recruitment, where I worked for 4 years, then moved to the BBC, where I worked in recruitment within tech, and by the time I left there, was in charge of all digital and tech recruitment across all of the BBC's UK sites. And I did a bit of television recruitment there as well. Then moved to the government digital service, helped them transform how they did recruitment in the civil service. And then I joined a startup called Bonfido just before their Series B. Scaled them from about 50 people to 250 people across 7 global locations. And then last year I joined the People Collective as a partner, and essentially what we do is the 4 of us use our skills and experiences, badges and our scars, as we say, helping startups and scale-ups learn from our experience. And so yeah, diversity is something that fully aligns with my personal values, and so by proxy I've always been in charge of diversity, equality and inclusion kind of initiatives wherever I've worked. So yeah, some things like Chikere, like Siobhan, close to my heart.
Awesome. Thanks, Zishan. So now that we've met our expert panel, what will we be addressing today? So firstly, we're going to look at taking action in 2020, how companies are making a stand and what can they do. Then we're looking at diversity and inclusion in the recruitment process. So looking at how do we source our candidates, how do we manage them through that process, and then how do we actually make them feel included once they join the business. Finally, we'll touch on making a business case, whether that's you need to speak to your leadership team and how to get them bought in to D&I, or if they're bought in, where do you start? What are the first steps that you can take as individuals in your organizations to start the process? Finally, we will save some time at the end for Q&A. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions off the back of this. Feel free to make a note of them as we go through and drop them in the chat, and we'll address them at the end. So before we get started, let's just take a quick poll to see where we all stand in terms of the current state of diversity and inclusion in your company. So it'd be great if you could let us know if it's not a priority, if you've got some initiatives, or if it's part of your mission. Feel free to click the online poll now. Awesome. So it looks like a lot of people have some initiatives in place, but actually quite a big part of the group are interested, but they haven't done anything yet and don't know where to start. So I don't know if Chikere, if you have any comments on this, and of course, Siobhan, Siobhan, we can come to you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Kelly, so much. You know, diverse inclusion is really, really important. And as a recruiter, hiring manager, you know, you really have, I guess, a chance to really shape the way your organization is. As a recruiter, I feel, you know, I have an amazing, amazing opportunity to ensure that the organizations I recruit for have got a diverse, you know, talent pool of candidates that I send to them. And as I said before, you know, when we speak about diversity and inclusion today, I really do feel it's different from when we spoke about it last year. You know, today we're talking about race, and race is such a difficult topic to talk about. And I think the issue is lots of people feel really, really uncomfortable. In the market I work in the London market, and I walk around London and I see a ready-made talent pool. But when I go into tech companies or fintech companies or financial services companies, I very rarely see people who look like me or look like Lashawn or look like Siobhan. And it's a case of, you know, what is happening? Why don't we have representation? You know, a lot of the times you see it at the lower levels, but not so much, you know, as you go up through the organization. So it's quite interesting looking at your poll that people have got some initiatives in place. But when we look at diversity, what I would like to know from everyone is, you know, yes, we look at the gender side of things, we look at sexual orientation, we look at disability, you know, but do you guys look at race? And, you know, what is everyone going to do to actually tackle that issue? So for me, it really, really is an important issue that we need to keep talking about. I think there's lots of performative actions. So, for example, we saw what happened to George Floyd, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement has been really prominent this year. You know, we've seen lots of organisations putting out solidarity statements, putting out black squares, and you know, I'd like to ask all of you: it's a case, is it just performative? You know, are you taking action? You know, what is actually going on?
Yeah, thank you, Chikere. And so, Sean, do you have anything to add there in terms of what our audience have said they're seeing in their businesses? Is that what you've seen similar across companies you've worked at previously?
Yeah, and I think as Chikere was saying, the door's kind of ajar now. The conversation is happening, and rightly, a lot of people are like, okay, well, what's next? Like you see in the football, the players and all the staff taking a knee, and yes, it's got awareness there, but now we're at a point of, well, what's next? What's the action? What's the tangible change going to be as well? So and that's hopefully what we can get a few starting points in the conversation.
Perfect, thank you. And Siobhan, I'm going to direct our first question towards you on that note. So you mentioned there's a Sean, football, you see players taking a knee. Diversity, equity and inclusion are a lot of buzzwords. But what does this actually mean if you take it into a workplace? How does that work at White Hat, Siobhan, and what does it mean to you?
So, kind of very short definitions. Diversity is about representation. It's about who has access to your company and who doesn't. And it's important to look at that both in teams and in every level of the organization. Sometimes if you just look at the aggregate data, you can think that your organization is pretty diverse. But actually, once you cut that by level or by different teams, you find that there isn't kind of distribution of that diversity. So that question for me is really about representation, and that's something we're really working on at White Hat as well. And then inclusion is much more around whether somebody can bring their whole selves to work and still feel like a crucial part of that company. Can they do their job to the best of their ability while still being themselves? Or is there kind of a cultural mold that maybe is explicit or implicit that you have to fit in order to be successful in that company? And that really squashes out diversity of thought and can make your organization a place that people from a diversity of backgrounds just don't want to work at, or you have kind of issues with retention. So you really do have to get both that representation, diversity piece right, and that inclusion piece right. And it's perfectly possible that you can have one without the other. You can have a workplace that feels very inclusive to the people that are there, but your representation is quite poor. Or you can have a workplace that's very diverse, but actually lots of people from different groups don't feel very included. So it has to be a kind of two-pronged approach.
Thanks, Siobhan. And on that note, picking up on representation, Chikere, one of the things you mentioned was that historically we've looked at kind of gender, sexual orientation in terms of diversity, but race isn't something that's been touched upon much until the Black Lives Matter movement this year, when obviously it's come to the forefront. From your perspective, you mentioned race can be a difficult conversation to have in the workplace. Have you got any advice as to how businesses could start approaching this topic, having open conversations, and then actually making change to ensure that their organizations are more diverse, have representation from different races?
Yeah, definitely. I think the issue that a lot of organizations are facing is the fact that they just don't have that representation within the organization. How can you talk about race if you don't have any representation, if you don't have people who look different from you? How do you know how to talk about it? And I think that's the issue that a lot of organizations are really having. And a lot of the hiring managers, a lot of the recruiters, I think the issue that I see all the time is that people tend to hire the same type of people. I guess, there's lots of referral schemes. So for example, if you have everyone who looks alike within the organization, you will find, that they continue to hire people that look like them. And I have spoken to lots of organizations recently about race because I do an allyship course. So if anyone's interested, please do let me know. And the issues they've all come up with is, that they all find it very uncomfortable speaking about race because they've never had to speak about race before. I think, it's obvious that I am a Black female, with a very foreign name. So for me, talking about race is something that I have lived through every single day. I walk out the door and it's obvious that I'm a Black woman, and I think the issue that a lot of organizations are having, it's very performative in terms of, them talking about, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But it's a case of, do they actually do it? Because nobody wants to talk about it. And I think until we have that inclusion and representation within an organization, I think it will be very, very difficult to talk about the differences or to talk about, hiring different types of people in terms of their race and their, I guess, religion and all the rest of it. But I think we really need to have an open and honest conversation about hiring Black, brown, people that don't particularly look like you. And I think, training is definitely something that a lot of organizations need to have. We need to start having that conversation. Organizations need to start, training their staff, training their hiring managers. And, I think Siobhan mentioned, representation and inclusion. To me, it's also belonging. So it's all jolly well and me working with an organization, but do I feel like I belong there? When I look at the C-suite, individuals up there, can I see people that look like me? Can I see mentors? So, we need to get, in terms of grassroots and graduates, we need to get diverse candidates through the door, but we also need to ensure that they feel like they belong, they feel welcome, and they can see themselves really progressing up the ladder.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And Zishan, I can see you've got you're dying to add something here, so please do join in.
Just to compliment again what Chika was saying, these are uncomfortable conversations, and actually recognizing that they are uncomfortable, but then also, the proverbial elephant in the room. Brene Brown has a wonderful turn of phrase, and it applies here into many things. It says, "I'm not here to be right, I'm here to do right." And just going in with that kind of humble, vulnerable mentality to say, listen, we're trying to unpack such a complex thing. And just, you don't have to have all the answers. Ask people, say, listen, I don't know the answer here. I'm offering a perspective. Again, and that's being inclusive of a diverse perspective. I'm not saying I am right, whether you're in the C-suite or anybody outside any of the level of the hierarchy as well. So again, that's just a simple human tool to get these conversations started. And that's the first step, doing one thing.
Sure. Siobhan, passing the mic on to you.
For me, the very first step is data. If you have diversity initiatives in your organization, that's fantastic. But if you have initiatives, but you don't know the ethnicity of your workforce, and you don't collect this data, then how do you know if any of those diversity initiatives work? How do you even know that you've got the right initiatives? So for me, kind of before you kind of are reactive and perhaps book a workshop or kind of put together something that so you feel like you're doing something, it's really important to actually have that really thorough internal look at the company and really identify, like you would if you were asking any other large questions of your business growth or the direction of your company, you would really drill down into the evidence and try and understand what the problems are and where the areas of improvement need to be, and then you would invest the money. And for me, that's very much how I approach diversity at White Hat as well, is kind of really building those foundations of data collection, monitoring and accountability for that data amongst the leadership is like the first thing you can do. And also it links to the final thing we're going to talk about with business case. If you have that data and you have that evidence to start with, that makes it much kind of more evidence driven, those conversations, rather than purely emotive conversations where you're kind of just hoping that you can change someone's hearts and mind. If you have the data and you have the evidence, it gives you a new level of structure to that conversation.
Can I just say something just to add on to what Siobhan has rightly said? I think I totally agree, and I think it's so important that organisations have got data, but I think the issues that lots of organisations are having is that there's no data. We use acronyms, the acronym BAME, as catch-all, tick boxes. And I think the problem is, how do you identify the individuals within your organisation? I hate the word BAME, because what Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, it's a case of it's white against everyone else. So if you have, I don't know, if you're going through your data within an organisation and you're trying to see the types of people you have there, you tick BAME, what does that mean? Do you know what I mean? How do you then go through and say, I've got X amount of Black people, X amount of brown people, and so on? So I think the problem is, rightly so, what Siobhan said, there's just a lack of data out there, and it's a case of, there's lots of work to be done.
Sure. Zishan?
Just to touch on that both as well, and there's two kind of data sets. One is your internal current team, and then you can use, there's numerous different tools that you could use for, salary, internal surveys, but then also your applicant data that are applying for your jobs. And we'll touch on it as we go through kind of the recruitment process, but it's understanding kind of your funnel in, as Siobhan said, and then also kind of the stages of your recruitment process. What's the drop-off like at each stage for those different diverse characteristics? And then also how many actually make it into your company. So you can measure both those and then go from there to set out what you want to improve and why. And that leads on to the business case as well. So hopefully just adding some more depth to what Chikere and Siobhan have mentioned there.
Sure, and that ties us really nicely into our next topic or section on the agenda. So looking at the recruitment process and what we can actually do here to improve diversity, as you said, both in that funnel and then moving into the workplace. So first to start with, going to look at sourcing. We've all spoken here a bit about gathering that data and how that's so important to understand your applicant pool. But Siobhan, I want to pass the mic to you to begin with. I know you do some really interesting work with contextualizing that data once you do have it at White Hat. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yep, so White Hat has been around for kind of 3.5 years now, nearly 4 years, I think. And we've kind of really trying to revolutionize how young people and kind of people at the early stage of their career can get into companies. And we do that very much through apprenticeships. So we both recruit the apprentices for the organizations, and then we also deliver all of their education for the sort of 12 to 18 months that they are on their apprenticeship. And we do that in business, finance and tech, anything from accountancy right through to software engineering. And how we focus on sourcing is very much embeddedness within the community. So we have a dedicated youth outreach team that work with schools right from year 10. So when young people start their GCSEs, right through to when they're leaving and maybe decide to come to White Hat to be an apprentice. We have about over 200 clients, including your Googles and your Facebooks and your Santanders, but also startups from as small as 10 people. And we also have charity and mission partnerships as well to really challenge ourselves to reach the young people who have kind of the greatest barriers to overcome in order to get into the workplace. So we have a partnership with a charity called Drive Forward, who support care leavers into employment. And we also work with the job centres all over London to help young people who are currently not in education, training or employment to get that first step. And that's for 16 to 24-year-olds. Once they apply to us, our platform is completely bespoke with their needs in mind. We've designed and built it, and it has some really important contextualization features. So it means that when our clients are looking at the digital profiles of a young person, they really understand their achievements in context. So an example would be our academic outperformer status. Now you get this status on our system if you fell within the top 30% of your secondary school for English and maths. So it's not necessarily based on the grade you got, because some young people go to schools where everybody gets A's and A stars and B's because the school is super high performing. Whereas other young people might have got a B, and that was one of the best grades in the entire year. But the employer can't necessarily see how hard they had to work for that B, the odds that they had to overcome. So our system tries to level the playing field there. We also have contextual flagging, and this is for young people that live within the 20% most deprived neighbourhoods in England, young people who've been eligible for free school meals, young people who've had refugee status, have been in local authority care, or have caring responsibilities themselves. So our employers can see those flags as well and understand just how hard that young person has had to work. Whilst they might not have played a really expensive musical instrument or some of those social capital things that very much come with privilege, the things that they have achieved are even more impressive when you understand what they've had to overcome. So that's very much how we think about sourcing and contextualization. We then have a dedicated youth talent team who prep every candidate before they sit in front of any of our employers to really give them a chance to shine and do their best. So yeah, anybody who wants to kind of challenge themselves to think, do I only have a graduate scheme? Are we kind of only letting people with degrees or people with years and years of experience into this organisation to consider another entry route? We'd be happy to discuss that at White Hat.
That's awesome, Siobhan. Really, really interesting what you guys are doing and how far you take things to ensure that young people are given equal opportunities. Chikere, Zishan, from your perspectives, when you're working with companies who maybe don't have the time, maybe they're smaller startups, so they just don't have the time to invest in such a big piece of work around engaging young people from an early age, if they just need candidates now, which I'm sure you hear all the time, they want to have hired someone yesterday. What's your advice for how they can attract diverse talent through that sourcing pipe tunnel?
Yeah, definitely. I'll go ahead. You know, I guess there's lots of ways that they can actually do that. I think first and foremost, they need to educate their hiring managers. That's first and foremost, you know. I think it's important that hiring managers, in-house recruiters understand the importance of recruiting diverse candidates and know where to go for them. That's the first thing. Try and use diverse job boards. You know, I guess, you know, they're not that, we don't really have that many in the UK, but there are quite a few coming up. So I think it's quite important to ensure that, you know, you go to places where you can attract this diverse talent. You know, I really believe in, if you are going to a recruitment agency, try and use recruitment agencies who have got diversity and inclusion high on their agenda in terms of sourcing diverse candidates. I think that's so important. You know, and I think for young people or even for experienced hires coming to an organisation, it's so important that your interview panel is diverse. You know, try not to have the same type of people, you know, interviewing. It's a case of, you know, you have a diverse candidate and this person can't see themselves within the organisation. So try and ensure that the panel is diverse, you know, and I think, you know, really do ensure that your website is representative of your values. You know, it's a case of you want to show the world that, you know, your organisation is diverse, it's inclusive, and the person will feel that they belong there. So it's just not getting into the organisation, it's also feeling that you belong there and that you can actually, you know, rise to the next level. So I think that's really, really, really important. And I think I'll say education and training. I think, you know, never be afraid to ask for training. Never be afraid to say, you know something, I just don't know. So get training. You know, there's lots of there's diversity inclusion training you can get. I do a training course whereby I teach hiring managers how to recruit diversely as well. And one thing I missed out was your adverts. Try and ensure that your adverts are written inclusively as well. I think that's really, really important. I know I can see Zishan is shaking his head, you know, but I just feel sometimes when you look at job descriptions, they're not inclusive at all. So just try and ensure that they're written, you know, inclusively, and just educate yourself, get training, and never be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, on that, there's just on the inclusive adverts, there's a couple of tools. One is Textio, which is quite expensive but great, and another one, there's a I think it's called Catfield Gender. I've got it as a bookmark. Basically, it just reads your adverts and just basically picks out the words which are hugely genderized or have kind of biases within them. The question, Kelly, was around kind of sourcing, and often what I found, and to complement what Chikere was saying, it's the expectation of what hiring managers want. Oh, so I need somebody with a first from Oxford in computer science. And my first question is, why? So what we actually want to challenge is the capability rather than just the qualification. Actually, you don't need somebody with a first from Oxford. What you need is somebody who's able to solve this problem. And so what my job as a recruiter was to be honest, make my job as easy as possible by opening up the search universe. And guess what? That's being inclusive as well. So what I challenged the hiring managers was like, that's not what we want. Tell me what's broken that needs fixing. And so I really tried to get under the crux of what the problem is, and then it's my job to find the solution. With all due respect, the hiring manager has a perspective on what the solution is, but it's my job to get a diverse pool of candidates to present that. Now, when it comes to a practical, I need the candidate yesterday. Sourcing, filling up the funnel, so to say, is like with any sales, is inbound and outbound. if you are a company with large, a value proposition that attracts diverse people, loads of people are just going to apply to you. If you're a small startup, not a large value proposition, people don't really know even who you are or what you do, then you're going to have to go out to them. And so that's going to be timely and expensive, not just in terms of cost, but time as well. So if you do need to do that and go out, you can partner with recruitment agencies or communities or specialists like ourselves on this panel and just say, where do I go? What do I do? It's not an easy, quick win. But I highly recommend doing a bit of both, because actually the bigger you get, if you go and outreach and then actually hire great people in and get them to be your ambassadors and evangelists and get them to go to their network, you've got the power of referral and the network. And then so you've got the inbound coming in. And there's no exact science to it, but work on the inbound and outbound and think about it like that, and build from there, really.
Awesome. Thanks, Sushan. That's a really great point that you make. I used to get it all the time when I was in tech hiring. We want a first-class comp sci grad from Oxford, Cambridge, any top red brick university. But actually, software engineering and computer science is one of those trades where it is based on your skill level, and you do have technical tests. You do need to make sure those tests are inclusive. I used to often get hiring managers that would tell me majority of candidates fail, and when you ask them, how many of your current team have actually passed this test? The answers were not so many. So it is making sure that actually it's reflective of your organization. You're not putting barriers to entry. You are being inclusive in the recruitment process as well, which leads us in nicely to our next section, looking at the recruitment process and how we can ensure that's inclusive. So Siobhan, I'm going to pass that over to you to begin with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that point. And you can use your apprenticeship levy to train people in these things. So with computer science also, by the time somebody's finished the degree, often there's a coding language that they actually have never used, or like tech is moving so fast that it doesn't necessarily provide the most applied and relevant education, whereas you can do a software engineering apprenticeship and you're kind of growing that talent yourself, and the government levy pays for that qualification. So it doesn't cost the individual or the company in that sense. In terms of like, I just wanted to also point out that where you said kind of if somebody's in a smaller company and they want to do these things, they can also just use this service. So our candidate pool is just over 50% from ethnic minority backgrounds. And as Chikere said, it's important to be able to drill into that. So about 20% are from Black backgrounds, about 20% are from Asian backgrounds, and about 10% are from mixed race backgrounds. And the other 50% are from white backgrounds. About 37% have a contextual flag, which is one of those socioeconomic indicators that I told you about. And just over 50% are female. So any employer that wants to recruit from that candidate pool just comes to White Hat and we provide that shortlist. So we do all of that work for them. They don't have to actually do that outreach work themselves. And then on kind of the recruitment process, I think it really speaks to what Sean was saying as well. We give employers a different matrix for measuring potential. So we really don't kind of put too much weight on prior academic attainment, because all of the research in the UK says that the biggest predictor of your grades is your parental income. It's got absolutely nothing to do with your natural aptitude at birth. Privilege plays such a big role in the UK on the grades that you will attain throughout your time at school. So instead, we recruit on 5 competencies, which include things like grit, resilience, conscientiousness, intent, how much does the individual want it, interpersonal skills, and communication. And by looking at those things, we feel that you can more holistically assess what an individual is going to bring to your company. So that's kind of what really shapes our processes. But yeah, that's us. I'll let somebody else answer the question now.
That's really awesome. Thanks, Siobhan. I'm just conscious of time. I know we could talk about this topic for a while. So much interesting debate, conversation, and discussion. But we'll move on and we'll look at next in terms of the existing workforce and inclusivity. So say you have managed to find those individuals, you do have that diverse talent coming through, how do you then make them feel inclusive? And also, what if your existing workforce isn't very diverse or inclusive? If it's not inclusive, should you be hiring diverse talent, or should you start by tackling inclusivity first? And Chika, I'm going to pass this on to you to begin with. Lots of questions, but start wherever you feel best.
I can imagine, actually. I definitely think it's important that organisations hire diverse talent, regardless of whether their organisations are diverse or not. I think it's just really important. But what I would say is that, training and education is key. I think I've spoken to so many people recently within organisations, and, they've reached out, and, I think I like to say that when I speak to a lot of these organisations, I always say to them, this is a safe place. Let's have a discussion. Let's have an honest discussion. And what a lot of them have said is, a lot of them have never thought about, they know diversity inclusion is important. And as I said before, for a lot of organisations, diversity inclusion was race was never really raised its head. And, it's important that, organisations know and understand how to recruit diversity across the board, including race. And as I said before, race is one of those topics that a lot of people find so difficult to talk about. So I think the key thing is, let's have an open, honest conversation. Let's talk about, what you find difficult. Let's talk about race. So in organisations, there's some organisations that don't even have any Black or brown people. So it's a case of, how do I make sure that these people who are coming in feel that they are included, and obviously feel that they belong, and feel that they can see themselves, at senior positions. So I think really training is key. I think education is key. As I said before, I train on allyship, what it means to be an ally, the importance of ally. I say to people, try and read. There's so many really great books that we can talk about later that you can read about as well, about anti-racism, about race. I think that's really, really important. But I just think organisations need to have the conversation first and foremost amongst themselves, so that they can ensure that, they are attracting and retaining diverse talent. Because I think the issue is that hasn't been happening, and it's just so difficult for a lot of organisations to actually, know where to start when it comes to hiring and making sure that this talent within the business is, really nurtured, and they feel welcome, and they feel that they belong there. But I will definitely say, training is key. So, the whole allyship training, I've got some things written down as well, because I just didn't want to forget what I was going to say. Unconscious bias training is another thing that's really, really good. Anti-racism training, and obviously attracting and retaining diverse talent. That's another training that I've found is being quite popular. So I do those training courses, and attracting and retaining diverse talent has been really, really popular. So I definitely think education is key, and organisations just need to keep educating themselves and ensuring that everything, their platforms, is representative of what they're trying to achieve.
Sure. So Sian, over to you.
Briefly, and again, it's almost like we planned this, but what Chika is saying, just to follow up on that, to have those conversations. And what I found when I worked at the BBC and in the government, there were diversity groups. And as a cis heterosexual brown male, I was invited to the BME group, actually. And then I was also invited, and I just went along to a few other groups. And what I found was they were, ironically, working in isolation. And so they were coming up with these ideas and then going out and almost kind of putting their armor on and going out to the rest of the organization, trying to champion their cases and saying, this is what we should do. And I took a step back and I was just like, this isn't working, because everyone is trying to, with the same objective, but is actually not being inclusive for diverse different groups. And so I had some thinking about this, and actually, so how do you start having those conversations internally? Because a diversity group has two facets to it. One is the inclusive safe space, where people from that identify with that characteristic come in, and it's exclusive for them, where they are able to, in a safe space, talk about their experiences. And actually there is where you formulate what the problems are that are happening internally, and that is without any debate. You don't have to justify it. That safe space of those people that identify with those characteristics have identified them. And then you've got the second part of that safe diversity group, which actually is inclusive of everybody else. So the output from those problems goes into those that more diverse group, and you go, right, here's the problems we've identified internally that happen here at this company. How should we solve them? And the reason why that works is essentially you're inclusive of diverse perspectives, and you don't, when people feel that they've been part of the solution, you don't have to sell it to them. And so you don't have to armor up, and it doesn't have to be a who shouts the loudest. And if that works in harmony multiple times, you're going to have people that are just going to be across all those diversity groups. You can have exec sponsors or whatever, and we could talk, actually I'll keep it short because we're stuck for time, but using that premise of how to have those internal conversations and surface them, and then going back to the, I'm here to be right, not, I'm here to do right, not be right type mentality, is how you can start opening up that conversation.
And on that piece, in terms of time, if anyone does have questions, do drop them into the chat and we will get through to them at the end. But Siobhan, keen to get your thoughts on this topic as well.
I think there's so much you can do with kind of internally when it comes to culture, values, existing workforce. But the two things I'd really pull out that I think are really impactful are leadership and management and ownership. So managers, especially like frontline and middle managers, have such a gatekeeper to how individuals experience your company. So they really have to be on board with what inclusive leadership and management looks like, because HR could be doing a fantastic job in theory, but if every manager and leader doesn't know how to live it, then that won't be the experience of your underrepresented staff. So if you're going to train anyone first, I would start with your leadership and management. And then the second point on ownership is, again, lots of companies currently hiring a diversity and inclusion lead, which is absolutely fantastic. But that person almost needs to act as a consultant to every department in the organization. But that responsibility for inclusion, for living it every day, sits with every single individual. So how are you fostering that sense of ownership from one of your frontline devs, right through to one of your operations managers, right through to kind of somebody in finance? How do they really understand what their role in inclusion is? Because they're going to have more daily interaction with colleagues than your diversity and inclusion lead. So it can't just sit with them.
Awesome.
Totally.
Thanks
and
so much.
I really do agree with what Siobhan's saying. I really do think it has to start from the top. And I think the issue is people at the top table are all the same. They all look the same and they all think the same. So we really do need the buy-in of senior leaders, really. And better still, if there's diversity at the top, because that will make our job easier. But definitely agree with what Siobhan and Zishan have said so far. And I think there's, I think it's exciting time. I think this is not bad time. I think we're talking about it, and I think change is coming. And I think we're in a better position now than we were in last year. And I keep telling people this, clients I talk to all the time, it's been horrible, the year and everything else, but I just think change is coming. And I'm just so glad that we're having conversations like this.
Thanks, Chikere. This ties in really nicely to the final piece of our agenda, looking at making the business case. So a lot, referring back to the poll at the beginning, quite a lot of the people attending today mentioned that there were some talks of initiatives or some early initiatives, but there wasn't real change happening in the organization. We've touched on their senior leadership, getting their buy-in. What are your pieces of advice, whether maybe you have some buy-in, they're talking about it, but there's not much action, or it's not even on the agenda at the moment? I'm going to pass it to Zishan to start with.
Well, I'm gonna tee off here, and so I'll be frank. DEI isn't for everybody. Matt Wells has got a question in the Q&A. Is it worth trying to build a more diverse workforce if you haven't created an equal and inclusive culture? No, it's not, because you're basically going to bring people into an environment which is not going to be one of belonging for them. So ask yourself, ask your leaders, ask yourself, are you honestly and authentically about it, or is this a performative thing? Are your decision-making leaders in it to actually be inclusive of diverse, or is it a PR marketing performative thing? Question, we've got 49, 50 odd panelists here. How many of those people are exec leaders in your companies? Or is it an HR or people or a talent person? Why are they not on this webinar? Do they not care, or have they delegated it or outsourced it? Actually, it's important, but not so important for me, because product and sales is actually what they care about. So are you, as the people person, the talent person, the one who has to build the business case? You're the one who's going to be pushing this boulder up the hill. What do they point and go, do it faster, or do it, you know, this way or that way? Why are they not helping you push that boulder? Why are they not actually carrying it as well? So it's judge your leaders by their actions, not their words. So if you are having to make a business case to justify why this is important, then just stop and ask yourself, that's a flag, right? Should I actually having to be justify this in these times, right? And hold them to a standard. So, you know, as I said, DEI used to sit over there. It was important but not urgent, but now it's important and urgent. And so when it comes to building a business case and like, how did I make it important and urgent and actually link it to product and sales and success? I started to think about it, and I landed with inclusivity leads to diversity, leads to innovation, leads to success. So inclusivity leads to diversity of perspective, which by proxy means you limit your blind spots, which therefore mean that you are able to innovate further, which gives you a competitive advantage. And if you have that competitive advantage, you are going to succeed by whatever metric of success your company chooses, whether it's revenue, whether it's market share, whatever it might be. Ergo, inclusivity leads to success as well. Now, what Chikere mentioned earlier, Siobhan's mentioned earlier, visual representation is absolutely important, right? Because if people can see people like themselves, or people that identify with characteristics like themselves, they're going to feel more likely or wanting to be involved in that organization. However, if your exec leaders are not being inclusive of these diverse people in the key decision making, then it's performative, right? Then you are basically got an exec team which all think the same because they've got the same perspectives and not inclusive of your wonderful diverse workforce, not just characteristics but perspectives. And so therefore they're opening themselves up to blind spots. Now, Jennifer Kim wrote a wicked blog post on this the other day. I'm not going to read it all, I was potentially going to, but find her on LinkedIn, find her on Twitter. And she basically just said, you have the right to not do it, but it's your choice and your funeral. And I really, really like that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you raised there, Zishan. There's so much research out there that shows the more diverse your leadership team, you know, the better success you as a business have overall in the long term, and outcompete competitors. If you have a diverse product, why would you not have a diverse team that reflects that in terms of your customer base? It goes back to, I think it was one of the iPhones that was built, and it was an all-male design team, and when females used it, gave them hand problems. If you had a woman in that team, that would have been solved. So it's looking at things like that. But Chikere, do you have anything you want to add here? Just conscious of time, we've got a few questions coming through as well.
Yeah, I'll just be really, really quick. I just want to say to you all that this is not going away, guys. You know, this conversation is not going away. And there's no point, you know, putting up barriers that will, you know, against recruiting diverse talent. And I think this has gone on for too long now. And it's a case of you all have to start thinking about next action. What do I do? How do I recruit more diversely? You know, I want to be able to tell my 2 young black sons, okay, who were British born, that they have got a chance in the world as good as everyone else, okay? And I've always banged on about, you know, being able to recruit diversely. I've always made sure that I try my best to ensure that my talent pool of candidate is as diverse as ever. And I just think we all need to start having that conversation. And I feel if you feel that you're not comfortable about having that conversation, let's have a chat. Let's get into some training. courses, because I think as a Black woman with Black sons who will be in the workforce in the next couple of years, I don't want them to go through what we've all had to go through, what I've gone through and what lots of people have gone through. So let's just have a conversation and let's really get this thing going.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to jump forward a little bit more now, and we'll get into some questions in a minute. But before we jump into those, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Workable. If you want to learn more, click yes on the poll, and then we will get in touch at a future date. But to give you some background, Workable is the world's leading hiring platform. We give in-house recruiters and hiring teams more ways to find more qualified candidates and help them work together to identify and hire the best talent. Since 2012, more than 20,000 companies have used Workable to hire over 1 million candidates to date. Diversity and inclusion is very important to us. Our product was built with inclusivity in mind. We are later this year releasing some features such as anonymized screening and DEI surveys and reporting. So if you want to find out more, please do let us know. But moving on to Q&A, I've got a really interesting question come through, very relevant to today's world as well. But in terms of developing D&I programs, initiatives, how do you do that in a remote environment? Who would like to kick off? Sishan, please go ahead.
I don't think it's much different to what you do in face, because it goes to what Siobhan said. You start with the data. So you would do an internal poll, you would do data from your inbound and your pipeline of candidates, and from there you would come up with a scientific method and a methodology to say, actually, our theory is we need to hire more X, we need to increase diversity of Y group, whatever it is, and here's how we go about it. I went to what we're trying to do is trying to solve this is a hugely complex challenge that kind of infiltrates every facet of society and has done since we actually had civilization. So, and it can become overwhelming. I saw Sarah Wood, who was ex-CEO of Unruly, talk, and she talked about how she increased diversity within her company, and she just said, just start with one thing and keep it simple. And that's the thing. I wrote a blog about it. That was the bit that I was just like, oh, that's so obvious. I can't fix it all. And that's what blocked me, because I was like, I have to solve this whole problem. I was like, no, let me use the data. Let me work with our founders and our exec team to identify and prioritize. Here's the biggest problem that we want to solve. And then we said, we did use an OKR, and it became a company OKR, where we said the objective is to increase X characteristic by Y. And it was a very ambitious target. And so our key results mapped that out. How are we going to go and do it? And we had a project plan, and it was ambition, but and we thankfully we got there, and we iterated in the end. But if you don't succeed at first, so what? Like, have that courage to actually just go, listen, we're going to do this, and we're going to roll with it. And actually, this is huge. This is the first time we're doing it, and we're not going to get it right, but we're going to do right, and go on from there with that mentality.
Right, and Chikere, you were nodding along there when Sishan mentioned you didn't feel it was any different in a remote environment. Please do elaborate on this.
Yeah, I just think it's definitely not different at all. There's no difference at all. But I think the issue that a lot of people have is, being able to do it. I think that's a problem. And I think, because, race is definitely in the mix, it makes for an uncomfortable task. But I think I go back to what Siobhan said. I think it's data. I think once we have the data, then we can make important decisions to actually dictate where we're at and what we need to do next. So I think, let's start getting the data going, and I think that's where we're lacking, that data. And I think that whole catch-all BAME word needs to, we need to somehow get rid of that word and, try and somehow categorize us into the categories that we should be in, because otherwise it's so difficult to know how many people you have in an organization. If we all tick the BAME box, how many Black people do you have? How many brown people do you have? How many Asian people do you have? So, you know, let's get the data going and let's get rid of the BAME word.
Yeah,
Sure.
in-house and at the People Collective, we do this now. We design those surveys. Workable is working on a feature for, I know there's one for the US diversity, but they're building one, and I think it's going to be released later on this year as a priority for diversity survey for candidates. And you know, you can use things internally like Peakon, or you could do just a simple Google form or a type form to get those. The key is actually, as Chikere was saying, what question do you are you X, Y, Z? What are those X, Y, Z? You don't have to solve that on your own. Reach out to us, any of us on the panel here, and we can help you with that as well.
Sure. And Siobhan, from your perspective and at White Hat, obviously you focus on apprenticeship schemes in a remote environment. How do you make these young people feel included when they've maybe never worked in a company before, never had to do things like Zoom calls? How do they feel included, like they can be part of the company, they know who to go to, and so on?
I think one of the great things about being new to the workforce is you also don't really have any prior expectations. So you're probably a bit more malleable than some of us who have maybe really missed that office culture, because that's what we've been used to for a really long time. So our apprentices have been incredibly adaptable, actually. Lots of our companies have gone ahead with their apprenticeship programs as usual, regardless of the remote environment, and we're certainly not seeing any disruption to productivity. So I think it's really just thinking about what is possible rather than reminiscing about what you would have liked to do, because it's still a life-changing opportunity for a candidate regardless. In terms of things we've done at White Hat to make it even better, we've really invested in our community offer. So we have a dedicated community team, and they very much work with apprentices when they're on programme. And we have mentoring programs, we have virtual peer support programs, we have virtual socials, we have a dedicated hub that they can find resources, connect with each other on. So especially for apprentices who might be at a startup, and so they are the only apprentice at that startup, it enables them to make friends with apprentices at other companies. And one of the feedback I often get from our apprentices is that they met their best friends that were also doing White Hat apprenticeships, but they might have been at one company and their friends at a completely different company. So yeah, really focus on what the possible is, and people surprise you if you trust them and you make every effort to support them. They will surprise you with what they can achieve during this climate.
Perfect, thank you. And we have one question that's come through. We've got another minute left, but I'm sure we can run over by a couple of minutes if we need to. We've got a question from one of our attendees. I'll read it out now, and then Zashan, if you would like to start with answering it. Bear with me 1 second. So I'm the head of HR in a small startup in India in the genetic diagnostic space. And one of the founders is an active ally and partner to a non-binary lesbian child. I myself identify as gay. We have tried hard over the last year to build inclusivity into policies, practices, recruitment, and we are aware it's something that we need to work on more. Focus is that with the leadership so invested in inclusion, I'm unsure how to authentically the message has been accepted. Can you recommend ways of getting a check on that?
Yeah, Ravi, first of all, thank you for sharing. That's a great question and shows so much kind of vulnerability and challenge. And what I would say is your gut instinct of saying, you know, my focus, I'm unsure how authentically the message has been accepted, or is there a pretense not wishing to alienate the leadership, right? So I think the way to approach that potentially is almost by playing a little bit naive and just going, hey, I'm not sure what it is, and approaching them either one-to-one or as a group, and actually first of all, identifying what is that a subjective feeling, or is there actually evidence and actions that they're doing? They're not turning up to events, they're not actually filling up their teams with diverse candidates, whatever. Jot that down to start with, and so at least you're clarifying it in your mind. Is it a subjective thing, or actually is there actually evidence of the fact that they're not buying in? And then give them feedback, either as individuals or as a slightly larger group, and just go, hey, I have noticed this. I just want to have a conversation with you about it. Are we being authentic about it? Or is, you know, and then start the conversation. And to do it, like we said before, is so difficult to just kind of step over that breach. But going into it almost vulnerable and just go, hey, I've noticed some things and I'm just wondering if, right? And then hopefully that kind of safe space that to facilitate that conversation will bridge that gap between what you think is an assumption that they're not really buying it, or whether they actually are, and actually you're being facilitated to have that conversation. Hopefully that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Just conscious of time, all. We've come to the end of our session. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. I can't thank you enough, Zishan, Chikere, Siobhan, for taking part today. We may have a couple more questions that have come through. What we'll do is we'll connect with you offline and get some answers, and then we'll send those out as well. So thank you so much once again for taking part in the panel today. Thank you to all our attendees for joining. As mentioned, if you want to find out anything more about Workable, feel free to get in touch. We'll share Chikere, Zishan and Siobhan's contact details in terms of whatever you guys want to give out, so you can get in touch with them directly if you want to find out more about the initiatives that they're running.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.